So we're moving on. We're going to talk about DNS services. If you don't know, DNS is the domain name service of the internet that allows you to translate custom domain names. Microsoft's classic is contoso.com. It can translate that classic domain name into an IP address. And there is one single authoritative server on the internet for each domain that's going to answer that question. And in this case, it'll be Microsoft's Azure DNS services when we set that up and register that. Now we could go through the portal and just sort of fill in the blanks. It's not so hard to create a DNS zone. But in this video, we're going to use PowerShell to do the same thing because we need to mix it up every once in a while. So I'm going to go into the Cloud Shell and start PowerShell. Now, before we create our DNS zone, let's create a new resource group to host everything. So it's new-Azure RM resource group. We'll give our resource group a name. I'm going to call it DNS group. And we have to give it a location. And I'm going to put it in Canada East. That was quick. Now we're going to create an Azure DNS zone. So it's new Azure RM DNS zone. We have to give our DNS zone a name. Now, you can name it anything. It's a pretty good idea to name your DNS zone after the domain name that you're going to be including in it. So I have a domain called the azureguy.ca. I love collecting domains, and I'm going to create a DNS zone for that within Azure. We just created our DNS group. It's going to be called DNS group. Let's create the DNS zone. All right, so we should have a DNS zone now within the DNS group. You'll notice that Microsoft is letting me know, even in the results here, the name servers. So there are 4 name servers that we can assign to this DNS zone, which means we need to go into our domain registry. If we use a domain registry service, we're going to have to modify the domain registry service to update it with Microsoft's name servers as listed. And that way the internet will know that Microsoft Azure is the home of the answer to this question as to where to go when someone types in the azureguy.ca into their browser. We're going to do that later because first we're going to set up the zone, and when we're happy with it, then we'll switch over the name servers. Now I have a web app that I recently created. I'm going to pull it into frame here. And this is an Azure web app, and you can see it uses this sort of subdomain.azurewebsites.net format to access it. So what I'm going to want to do is I'm going to want to use my custom domain name to access that app. So Azure's given me an IP address that I can use to redirect my custom domain name, the azureguy.ca, to my web app. And in order to do that, I need to add records to my domain name zone. Now there are a number of different records. Some of them are for mail. Some of them are to securely identify that you own a domain. We're going to use what's called an A record. An A record in domain name parlance allows you to map the IP address to the domain name. There's also something called a CNAME record, which would allow us to map the domain name to another domain name. But we're going to use an A record. So in order to add to this zone, we're going to have to use the new Azure RM DNS record set. The domain that we want to map is called the www domain. Now this is the reason why many websites start their URL with www, because it's a host name within the DNS system. We want to have record type A. The zone name is the azureguy.ca. And here's the resource group name. Was DNS group. Now there's a thing called TTL, time to live, or time to live. Essentially, this is the amount of time that we recommend that other domain name servers cache or save this information. Okay, so if we're going to set up an A record, instead of having every single browser come and look up the answer every single millisecond, there are servers in between that can cache that information. So 3600 is a pretty standard value. This is measured in seconds, I believe. So this is an hour, right? 60 seconds and 60 minutes. So that's a 1 hour caching recommendation. Now the part that's tricky is we need to then pass in a record. So we're going to use a bracketing here, which allows us to call another commandlet. So the new Azure RM DNS record config. The tricky thing about here is if I make a typo, so new Azure RM DNS record config, and it takes in an IPv4 address. So let's get the IP address that Microsoft's offering to me. So I have to cut out the HTTP bits. Now I have to put this in quotations too. All right. So this should create an A record within our DNS zone, which will allow us basically to the zone to know what to do when it gets a request for www. It sends that request to this IP address. So that succeeded. We can see the correct IP address mapped to the zone as an A record. Now the next thing we can do, let's use PowerShell continuing. So I'm going to say get Azure RM DNS record set. So we'll just verify what records exist besides this A record, the Azure. Oh, this is called DNS group. So we've got an NS record, an SOA record, and an A record. There's 3 records. Obviously, the other 2 records were provided by Microsoft as defaults. Now, what we need to do is we need to remember earlier on Microsoft gave us the name servers. I'm actually going to copy .com, .net, .org, and .info. Wow, I didn't even realize till now that they put it across to 4 different top-level domains even. How's that for, high availability, right? So we're going to have to go to our domain name registrar and update that with these. I'm going to do at least 2, minimum of 2 name servers in order for this to be successfully delegated. So I'm going to pause the video and do that. All right, so I pasted all 4 name servers. This is Namecheap as my domain registrar. I pasted all 4 into the name service field, and now I need to save this. And that'll take a little while to update. So we're going to have to basically come back and update Azure with some new information once we've got this complete. But it'll take a little while.